The marble floors of the Meridian Tower gleamed under the afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the 42nd floor executive suite. Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart methodically through the hallways, her practiced eyes scanning for the smallest imperfections that others might overlook. 23 years of cleaning corporate offices had taught her that the devil lived in the details, and in a building where million-dollar deals were struck daily, perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The executive floor was always eerily quiet after 5 o'clock, when the last of the power brokers had departed in their luxury cars, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the weight of decisions that shaped entire industries. Rosa had grown accustomed to the silence, finding a strange comfort in the emptiness of spaces that buzzed with tension and ambition during business hours. She had seen executives rise and fall, witnessed celebratory champagne spilled on Persian rugs, and watched grown men pace these very halls while their empires crumbled around them. Among all the offices she maintained, there was one that had always intrigued her more than the others. The corner suite belonging to Harrison Blackwood, a man whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose investment firm controlled assets worth more than the GDP of small nations. Yet in all her years of cleaning his office, Rosa had perhaps exchanged no more than a dozen words with the man himself. He was always polite when their paths crossed, offering a brief nod or a courteous good evening, but there was something distant in his eyes, as if he carried the weight of secrets too heavy for casual conversation. This particular Tuesday evening felt different somehow, though Rosa couldn't quite put her finger on why. The building's security guard, Marcus, had mentioned during her check-in that Blackwood had left earlier than usual, seeming distracted, and forgetting his usual ritual of ensuring his office door was locked twice. It was a small detail, the kind that might go unnoticed by someone less observant, but Rosa had built her career on noticing the small things that others missed. As she entered Blackwood's office with her master key, the familiar scene greeted her. The imposing mahogany desk positioned to command a view of the city skyline. Walls lined with awards and photographs of the financiers shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, and the subtle but unmistakable markers of immense wealth. Crystal decanters filled with amber liquid, a watch collection worth more than most people's homes, and leather-bound books that looked more decorative than read. Rosa began her routine, starting with the bookshelves and working her way systematically around the room. She had learned long ago that consistency was key, not just for thoroughness, but because any deviation from routine could be noticed and questioned. In buildings like this, where corporate espionage was a real concern and NDAs were signed as readily as business cards were exchanged, even the cleaning staff had to be above suspicion. It was while dusting behind the framed photograph of Blackwood, receiving some humanitarian award, that Rosa first noticed the corner of paper sticking out from behind the frame. Her initial instinct was to push it back into place. Clearly it had slipped from wherever it was supposed to be filed. But as she reached to adjust it, her fingers caught the edge of what felt like expensive stationery, and something made her pause. In her decades of cleaning offices, Rosa had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the emotional temperature of a room. She could sense when deals had gone bad by the way papers were scattered, could tell when someone was under investigation by the boxes of documents that appeared overnight, and could predict layoffs by the sudden appearance of shredding services. This office, tonight, felt charged with an energy she had never encountered before. The paper was cream-colored, heavy stock, with writing in what appeared to be Blackwood's distinctive handwriting. She had seen enough of his signatures on documents left on his desk to recognize the sharp, angular script. But this wasn't a business document or a memo. The header read, "If you are reading this," and Rosa felt her heart skip a beat as she realized she was looking at what appeared to be a personal letter, possibly never intended for anyone else's eyes. Her first instinct was to replace the letter immediately and pretend she had never seen it. Rosa had built her reputation on discretion, and clients trusted her with access to their most private spaces precisely because she had never violated that trust. But something about the urgency of the opening line made her hands tremble slightly as she held the paper. The beginning of the letter spoke of regrets and missed opportunities, of a man who had spent so much time accumulating wealth that he had forgotten to accumulate the things that actually mattered. But it was the third paragraph that made Rosa's breath catch in her throat and caused her to sink into the leather chair beside Blackwood's desk, the letter trembling in her hands. I have decided that my death should not be the end of my ability to help others, the letter continued. I have been watching more carefully than anyone knows, and I have seen kindness where others see invisibility. There is a woman who cleans my office, Rosa Martinez, who does not know that I notice the small things she does that go beyond her job. She waters the plant by my window that I never remembered to care for. She arranges my desk, not just for neatness, but in a way that makes my mornings slightly easier. She once spent her own break time helping maintenance fix the coffee machine that serves the entire floor, asking for nothing in return. Rosa's hands were shaking so violently now that she had to set the letter down on the desk to continue reading. This was impossible. In all her years of working, she had never imagined that anyone in these executive suites truly saw her as more than part of the invisible army of people who kept their world functioning. The letter continued with details that stunned her. Blackwood had noticed when she worked extra hours without billing for them to ensure a client presentation space was perfect. He had seen her slip her own lunch to a homeless man outside the building. He knew about the English classes she attended at night to better communicate with clients. And somehow he even knew about her daughter Maria's dreams of medical school. The next section of the letter outlined something that seemed too extraordinary to be real. Blackwood had established a trust fund, unknown to anyone except his lawyer and now, apparently, documented in this hidden letter. The fund was designed to provide full scholarships for the children of service workers who demonstrated academic excellence and whose parents showed the kind of character he had observed in Rosa. But more than that, he had designated Rosa herself as the fund's administrator with full authority to identify and support deserving recipients. I am leaving you this responsibility not because of pity or guilt, but because in a world where I have learned to trust very few people, I trust your judgment more than my own when it comes to recognizing genuine goodness in others. The initial funding is $25 million, with additional amounts to be added based on the fund's performance and the results of your administration. $25 million. Rosa read the number 3 times before it began to feel real. But it wasn't the money that made her hands shake and her eyes fill with tears. It was the recognition. For the first time in her professional life, someone had not just seen her work, but had truly seen her. The letter went on to provide practical details about accessing the fund, contact information for the lawyer who would handle the legal aspects, and a request that Rosa keep the funds. Origins.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Private to avoid publicity that might compromise its effectiveness. But it was the final paragraph that broke through Rosa's carefully maintained professional composure. I know this letter will come as a shock, and I know you may question whether you are the right person for this responsibility. But I have watched you for years, and I have never seen you make a decision based on personal gain or take credit for kindness shown when no one was watching. These are the qualities that cannot be taught or purchased, and they are exactly what this fund needs to succeed. Please do not let humility prevent you from accepting this responsibility. The children and families you will help deserve someone exactly like you making these decisions. Rosa sat in the growing darkness of the office, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside the massive windows, trying to process what she had just read. This letter represented more than money. It represented a complete transformation of her understanding of her place in the world. She had spent decades believing herself invisible, doing good work quietly, and without recognition because it was simply who she was, never imagining that anyone in these towers of power was paying attention. But as the initial shock began to subside, Rosa's practical mind started working through the implications of what she had discovered. This letter was hidden, not filed with official documents. Blackwood was still alive, still coming to work, still managing his empire. Why would someone write such a detailed letter about posthumous wishes and then hide it rather than file it with their estate planning documents? The answer came to her gradually, and with it, a growing sense of urgency that made her pulse quicken. She thought about Marcus's comment about Blackwood leaving early and seeming distracted. She remembered the unusual energy in the office tonight, the sense that something was different. And now, this letter, written as if Blackwood was preparing for his death, but hidden in a place where it might never be found unless someone was specifically looking for it. Rosa had cleaned enough offices and seen enough human drama to recognize the signs of someone in crisis. The letter wasn't just estate planning. It was a cry for help disguised as final wishes. Blackwood had written it and hidden it in the one place where someone he trusted might find it, perhaps hoping that if his plans went forward, at least some good would come from the discovery. But the hiding place also suggested he wasn't entirely committed to those plans, wasn't ready to make them official. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Harrison Blackwood, one of the most powerful men in the city, was contemplating suicide. And he had chosen to leave this massive responsibility and gift to her because he had seen something in her character that he valued more than all the prestigious contacts in his network. But more immediately, he might be planning to end his life soon, and she might be the only person positioned to intervene. Rosa's mind raced through everything she knew about Blackwood's recent behavior. The distraction Marcus had mentioned, the early departure, the fact that this letter existed at all. She thought about the humanitarian award photograph that had concealed the letter, a reminder of public recognition for charity work that perhaps felt hollow to a man who had come to question the meaning of his entire life. Her training as a mother kicked in, the same instincts that had helped her recognize when her daughter was struggling in school or when her elderly neighbor needed help but was too proud to ask. Sometimes the people who seemed most successful and self-sufficient were actually the most isolated and vulnerable. And sometimes a simple gesture of human connection could mean the difference between hope and despair. Rosa knew she was about to cross a line that could cost her job and possibly expose her to legal consequences. She was about to violate every protocol of professional boundaries and client privacy. But she also knew that some situations transcended normal rules, and this was clearly one of them. She carefully photographed the letter with her phone, not to violate Blackwood's privacy, but to ensure she remembered the lawyer's contact information and other crucial details. Then she replaced the letter exactly where she had found it, making sure it appeared undisturbed. If she was wrong about her interpretation, she wanted no evidence of her discovery. But if she was right, she needed to act quickly. The building directory listed Blackwood's home address, something she had never paid attention to before, but which was accessible to cleaning staff for emergency contact purposes. Rosa finished her cleaning routine with mechanical precision, her mind racing through possible approaches to what might be the most important conversation of her life. By the time she completed her rounds and checked out with Marcus, Rosa had made her decision. She would drive to Blackwood's home and find a way to speak with him. She couldn't call. What would she say? That she had found his suicide note and wanted to talk? That would likely result in security being called and her being arrested. But a face-to-face conversation, carefully approached, might give her the chance to connect with him as one human being to another. The drive to Blackwood's estate in the hills outside the city gave Rosa time to think about what she would say. She couldn't reveal that she had found the letter. That would betray the trust he had placed in her by writing it. But she could find another reason to be concerned about him, could offer the kind of human connection that the letter suggested he was missing. Blackwood's home was everything Rosa had expected, a sprawling modern mansion with perfectly manicured grounds and security gates that probably cost more than most people's cars. But as she approached the property, she noticed something that struck her as odd. The gates were standing wide open, and there were no security personnel visible. For someone of Blackwood's wealth and profile, this level of casual security seemed out of character. Rosa parked her modest sedan outside the gates and walked up the curved driveway, her heart pounding with each step. She had never done anything remotely like this before, and every rational part of her mind was screaming that she should turn around and go home. But the letter had changed everything. She was no longer just Rosa the cleaning lady. She was someone who had been entrusted with a profound responsibility, and that trust came with obligations she was only beginning to understand. The front door of the mansion was solid wood with frosted glass panels, and Rosa could see lights on inside. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What if she was completely wrong about everything? What if Blackwood simply saw her as an intruder and called the police? What if the letter was just an exercise in creative writing or estate planning that she had misinterpreted? But then she thought about her daughter Maria, dreaming of medical school but afraid to hope too big because of financial realities. She thought about all the other service workers' children who had the intelligence and drive to achieve great things but lacked the resources. And she thought about a man so isolated that he would trust a virtual stranger with his deepest hopes for making amends with the world. Rosa knocked firmly on the door, 3 clear raps that echoed through what sounded like a large entrance hall. For a long moment, there was no response, and she began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Then she heard footsteps approaching, and the door opened to reveal Harrison Blackwood himself, looking surprised and somewhat disheveled. Up close, Rosa could see that the man who commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors looked exhausted and older than his 58 years. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, his tie loosened, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of profound weariness. "Rosa," he said, and his use of her name surprised her. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right at the office?" "Mr. Blackwood," Rosa began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was concerned about you. You left early today, and Marcus mentioned you seemed upset about something. I know it's not my place, but I've worked in that building long enough to recognize when someone is carrying a heavy burden." Blackwood stared at her for a long moment, and Rosa saw something shift in his expression. Perhaps it was surprise that someone had noticed his distress, or maybe it was relief that someone cared enough to check on him. Whatever it was, he stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. "That's very kind of you," he said quietly, leading her into a living room that was elegantly furnished but felt strangely impersonal. "I have to admit, I'm not used to anyone noticing or caring about my emotional state. Most people see me as either a business opportunity or an obstacle to overcome." Rosa settled into a chair across from where Blackwood sat heavily on a leather sofa. The room was beautiful but cold, filled with expensive art and furniture that looked more like museum pieces than items chosen for comfort or personal meaning. It was the home of someone who had everything money could buy, but perhaps nothing that truly mattered to him. "Mr. Blackwood," Rosa said carefully, "in my years of cleaning offices, I've learned that success and happiness don't always go together. Some of the most successful people I've met have also been the loneliest. And sometimes, when people are carrying burdens alone, they forget that there are others who see their struggles and care about their well-being." Blackwood looked at her with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "You know, Rosa, I've probably had more conversations with therapists and business advisors than I can count, but none of them have ever started with such a direct observation about the relationship between success and isolation. What made you decide to come here tonight?" Rosa chose her words carefully, knowing she was walking a tightrope between offering help and revealing too much about what she knew. "I've watched you for years, Mr. Blackwood, and I've seen someone who works harder than almost anyone else in that building. But I've also noticed that you seem to carry all that responsibility alone. Tonight, when I heard you had left early looking upset, I couldn't stop thinking about whether anyone was making sure you were okay. And you decided that person should be you?" Blackwood asked, but there was no mockery in his voice, only wonder. I decided that sometimes we have to be the person we wish had been there for us when we needed help, Rosa replied. And I have a feeling that you might need someone to talk to more than you've been willing to admit to yourself. For the next hour, Rosa listened as Harrison Blackwood opened up about feelings and fears he had never shared with anyone. He talked about the pressure of managing other people's money, about the loneliness of making decisions that affected thousands of jobs, and about the growing sense that his life had become a series of transactions rather than relationships. He spoke about parents who had died before he could repair their relationship, about opportunities for love that he had sacrificed for career advancement, and about the growing realization that he had built an empire but had no one with whom to share its rewards. As he talked, Rosa began to understand the depth of his isolation and the complexity of his pain. This wasn't just a case of depression or temporary business stress. This was a man who had achieved everything society told him to want and discovered that none of it provided the meaning or connection he actually needed. The letter she had found wasn't just a suicide note. It was the desperate attempt of someone trying to find a way to make his life meaningful, even if he couldn't find a reason to continue living it. You know what's strange? Blackwood said, as their conversation wound down. I've been thinking lately about leaving something behind that would make a real difference. I've been watching the people who work in my building, really watching them for the first time, and I've been amazed by the kindness and integrity I see in people who have so much less than I do, but who seem to understand something about life that I've missed entirely. Rosa felt her heart skip a beat at these words, recognizing them as directly connected to the sentiments expressed in the hidden letter. This was her opening, her chance to redirect his thinking from ending his life to transforming it. Mr. Blackwood, she said gently, what if the answer isn't leaving something behind, but rather changing how you live going forward? What if instead of thinking about your legacy after death, you started thinking about your impact while you're alive to see it? Blackwood looked at her with renewed interest. What do you mean? I mean that you have resources and influence that could change lives right now. You don't have to wait until you're gone to start making the kind of difference you want to make. And you don't have to do it alone. There are people who would be honored to help you, to work with you on projects that could bring meaning to your life while helping others. Rosa watched as something shifted in Blackwood's expression, a spark of possibility that hadn't been there before. She continued, choosing her words carefully to plant seeds that might grow into the very ideas expressed in his hidden letter. For instance, I know you've seen the people who clean your building, who serve your food, who maintain the systems that keep your business running. Many of them have children who are brilliant, who dream of careers in medicine or engineering or teaching, but who may never get the chance because of financial barriers. What if you could be the person who changes that? What if you could see their success, celebrate with them, watch them graduate, and start careers that make their parents proud? Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, and Rosa could see him processing these ideas, connecting them to thoughts he had clearly been having on his own. Finally, he spoke. You're suggesting I find purpose in helping others achieve their dreams? I'm suggesting that you already have everything you need to be a hero in the lives of people who would never expect such kindness from someone in your position. And I'm suggesting that being that kind of hero might give your life the meaning you're looking for. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Rosa had ever experienced. She found herself discussing educational funding strategies, talking about her daughter's medical school aspirations, and sharing stories about other service workers' families she knew who had extraordinary potential but limited opportunities. Blackwood listened with an intensity she had never seen from him before, asking detailed questions and taking notes on his phone. By the time Rosa left Blackwood's house that night, she knew that something fundamental had shifted. The man who had written that desperate letter earlier was already beginning to transform into someone who saw possibilities rather than endings. He walked her to her car, thanking her repeatedly for caring enough to check on him and promising to call her the next day to discuss some of the ideas they had explored. Over the following weeks, Rosa watched with amazement as Harrison Blackwood began to implement changes that seemed to energize him in ways she had never witnessed. He started eating lunch in the employee cafeteria occasionally, striking up conversations with security guards and maintenance staff. He began asking Rosa about her colleagues' families, remembering details about their children's activities and achievements. More significantly, he retained a lawyer to begin establishing an educational foundation focused on providing scholarships for service workers' children. Rosa found herself consulted at every step of the process, her insights about the communities they wanted to serve valued as highly as those of the high-powered consultants Blackwood usually relied upon. 3 months after that night at Blackwood's house, Rosa received a call asking her to meet with him and his lawyer to discuss something important. She arrived at the law office nervous but hopeful, wondering if this meeting would finally reveal whether Blackwood had indeed written the letter she had discovered. "Rosa," Blackwood began as she settled into a chair across from his lawyer's desk, "I want to talk to you about taking on a new role. The foundation we've been discussing is ready to launch, and I can't think of anyone I would trust more to run it than you." The position he described was everything the hidden letter had outlined: full authority to identify and support deserving scholarship recipients, a substantial salary that would allow Rosa to leave her cleaning job, and the resources to make a real difference in the lives of families like her own. But this time, the offer was coming directly from Blackwood himself, presented as a natural result of their collaborative work on the foundation rather than as a posthumous gift. "I need someone who understands the communities we want to serve," Blackwood continued. "Someone who can recognize genuine need and authentic character. I need someone I trust completely to make decisions that align with the foundation's mission. Rosa, I can't imagine anyone more qualified than you for this responsibility." Rosa accepted the position with tears in her eyes, not just because of the opportunity it represented for her and her family, but because she had played a role in saving a life and transforming it into something meaningful and productive. Harrison Blackwood was alive, thriving, and using his resources to create exactly the kind of legacy he had dreamed of in his darkest moment. She never told him about finding the letter, and she never returned to look for it behind the photograph in his office. Some secrets were meant to remain secrets, especially when their discovery had led to outcomes better than anyone could have planned. Years later, as Rosa sat in her foundation office reviewing scholarship applications from the children of janitors and cafeteria workers and security guards, she would sometimes think about that Tuesday evening when she had found a piece of paper that changed everything. The Blackwood Foundation had provided full scholarships to over 200 students by then, including her own daughter Maria, who was thriving in medical school. But perhaps more importantly, Harrison Blackwood had become a different man, still successful in business, but also deeply connected to the foundation's work and to the families it served. He attended every scholarship ceremony, remembered every recipient's name, and followed their progress through school and into their careers. The isolated, desperate man who had written that hidden letter had transformed into someone who found meaning and joy in the success of others. Rosa had learned that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we notice what others miss, when we pay attention to the small signals that reveal larger truths. She had also learned that heroism doesn't always involve dramatic rescues or public recognition. Sometimes it simply means caring enough to check on someone who seems to be struggling, or trusting your instincts when something doesn't feel quite right. The cleaning lady who had once felt invisible had become the administrator of a multi-million-dollar foundation. But more than that, she had become the person who recognized that sometimes the most powerful people in the world need saving just as much as anyone else. And sometimes, the person best positioned to do that saving is someone who has been watching quietly from the margins, seeing things that others miss because they understand that everyone, regardless of their wealth or status, needs to feel seen and valued. The letter behind the photograph had been a cry for help disguised as final instructions. Rosa's decision to act on what she had discovered had turned it into the beginning of a new chapter rather than the end of a story. And in doing so, She had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts we can give others are the opportunities to transform their pain into purpose, their isolation into connection, and their despair into hope. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.